Hello, and thank you all for coming out today. And to those of you at home, thank you for joining us virtually. My name is Paloma Lopez, and I am the Education Manager at the Indian Arts Research Center here at the School for Advanced Research. SAR is situated on traditional Tiwa lands. Our campus is surrounded by the landscapes of Pueblo, Apache, and Dene communities, all of whom maintain vital connections to this place. Today's presentation, Meet the Pueblo Fiber Arts Guild, is the second of 4 events in this year's series leading up to the Pueblo Fiber Arts Show at the Poeh Cultural Center on May 11th. Originally, this event was to be led by both Louie Garcia and Chris Lewis, but unfortunately for all of us, Chris was unable to make it today. Fortunately for us, Louie Garcia is here and he is a fount of incredible knowledge. Louie Garcia is Chicano and Tiwa Piro Pueblo from Socorro del Sur Pueblo, just south of El Paso, Texas. He is a fiber artist and educator based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He holds a BA in biology and Spanish and an MA in language literacy and sociocultural studies. In 2011, Louie founded the New Mexico Fiber Arts Guild. The mission of the Guild is to promote, revive, and maintain the age-old Pueblo Fiber Arts tradition among Pueblo communities and educate the general public about the importance of this ancient art form. Please join me in welcoming Louie Garcia.
Thank you. Makwam hirimba, maupuyuan, melam hiae, nauna atsihem, kwe kitei. Good morning, everybody. My name is Louie Garcia, and thank you for that introduction, Paloma. Thank you, SAR, for hosting this event and putting this series together as we lead up to our Pueblo Fiber Arts Show happening May 11th at the Poeh Arts Center. Happy to be here today to share a little bit about our journey in creating the Pueblo Fiber Arts Guild, which is something that I've been involved with, and it started out of some work, museum work that I was doing at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center in Albuquerque. And so, as was mentioned, I am Tiwa and Piro from Socorro del Sur Pueblo. I was actually born and raised here in Albuquerque, but my family traces back to the Pueblo of Socorro del Sur, which is just right outside of El Paso, Texas area. Growing up with my grandfather, I had the privilege of being able to learn more about our Pueblo heritage, and part of that being the Pueblo Fiber Arts. So he knew since from a young age, I've always kind of leaned towards the arts and different art forms and so on. So my grandfather just kind of watched me as, I have 2 other brothers, and as we were growing up, me and my brothers are very different, and my brothers kind of were interested and involved in other things, but I was always really interested in things that my grandfather was doing, and he was a farmer, and so I was always kind of his shadow going wherever he went. And so he would often do different types of needlework stuff and weaving, little small projects, and I was always very keenly interested in that. And so growing up here in Albuquerque and going and visiting, going to the feast days in the pueblos in this area, I was always, mesmerized by the textiles and the traditional clothing of us as Pueblo people. And so I always just had a natural interest and curiosity in that area. And so as I grew and, learned more about research and different stuff, I've always kind of had that interest in the background as I was working on, making my way through academia and into my profession as an educator. So I've at the point now where I'm able to combine the two, as I will talk about in my presentation today: education, Pueblo history and culture, and my passion for teaching and sharing and educating. So next slide, please. So as most of you may be familiar with, Pueblo weaving has a very long history here in the Pueblo Southwest, well over 1,000 years, dating back to what archaeologists know as basket maker period. So because of this history, we know that the Pueblo textile arts is a tradition that predates the pottery, the Pueblo pottery tradition. So, and the archaeological record, which we're lucky here in the desert Southwest to have an archaeological record that reflects this amazingly long history. So we know through oral tradition as well as archaeological evidence that cotton was introduced into the Pueblo Southwest through indigenous trade. And most evidence suggests that cotton came into the Pueblo Southwest around 600 AD. And so cotton was a very important fiber that was used to make most of the clothing, both everyday clothing as well as ceremonial clothing. Not only for all the qualities that we love cotton for today, but also the religious use and the metaphor for clouds. And being agricultural people, as we are as Pueblo people, the clouds are very important, and in our prayers and in our ceremonies, we always acknowledge the cloud beings and the moisture that comes with them to bless the people. Shortly after that, as we know, the colonial history of the Southwest, as the Spanish came into the Southwest and occupied our Pueblo homelands, the Spanish also brought several, the main fiber was wool, the sheep that were brought with the Spanish, and then the different techniques and looms that were brought. So knitting, different types of needlework, very likely metal needles for embroidery. Some of you may be familiar with colcha embroidery, which, some researchers believe that there may be a relationship between colcha and what we know today as Pueblo embroidery. Although the two stitches are distinct stitches, but, related nonetheless. And then after the Spanish occupation, the Mexican period, then we have the boarding school era, where many Native children were taken from their communities to attend formal education and be Americanized, if you will, where many of the students were completely removed from their families and their communities. They were forbidden to speak their languages. And my own grandfather was a survivor from the Albuquerque Indian School. So I remember growing up listening to the stories of his experiences at the Albuquerque Indian School. And then, of course, a significant event in the history of New Mexico was the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, which came through in 1878. So with the advent of the railroad, we get an influx of lots of different commercial materials, such as commercial cloth, commercial yarns, commercial dyes, so on and so forth. So that definitely was a milestone and changed Pueblo textiles for forever, right after that. And then today we have the traditional and contemporary revitalization of Pueblo textiles. Several years ago in 2010, I co-curated an exhibit called Gathering of the Clouds at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center. Some of you may have seen that exhibit. But it was, we featured the textile collection of Dr. Gregory Schaff, who's in the audience today. Welcome, Greg. Definitely one of my supporters, and it definitely has, gave me open access to his collection, and that really piqued my interest in looking at both private and public collections in, private collections and as well as museum collections. And since then, I'll talk a little bit more about my museum experience in some coming slides. But I want to draw your attention to the image on the left, which is a young woman from the Pueblo of Isleta. I think there's a date, 1889. And what I like about this picture is that it shows the backstrap style of weaving. And most people think of Southwest weaving as being kind of on an upright loom, which is stationary upright. But for many of the sashes and belts, we do know that this style of weaving, which is very Mesoamerican, and I'll address that in a later slide, is seen here where the warps are staked in the ground, probably with a metal stake, and then she has a back strap band around her back connected to the bottom loom bar, and it's a circular warp. It's the exact same setup that we use today to make the sashes and belts, but here we see her set up in a back strap form. And so there aren't too many Pueblo weavers today that still use this. Of course, I've experimented with it and use it from time to time, but there are certain textile that does require the use of a backstrap, and that is the braided wedding sash. So traditionally, these sashes are, of course, made out of 100% cotton. The characteristic braided corn husk balls at the end of the fringes, which kind of define this particular sash, which was traditionally braided, not woven, out in the Hopi villages of northern Arizona. So these sashes out in Hopi are known as wedding sashes, and they're braided and prepared for a Hopi bride at the time of her wedding. And so after the actual wedding, then the sash is usually kept in the family and used by the men for ceremonial uses in the traditional dances. But there's a lot of representation. And so this structure and the style of weaving is actually more akin to braiding because there is no weft. So if you're familiar with weaving at all, you have your vertical elements, which is the warp, which kind of, I usually describe it to my students as the skeletal structure of a textile, and then the weft, which is the yarn that goes back and forth. So you have a 90-degree cross to create the web or the textile. Unlike that, in the braiding technique, which is known as sprang, it's actually braiding, and it's a series of sticks that are used to create a series of sheds, and those sticks are used to transfer the braid, so that you have, if you look at the sashes, you see there's always going to be a kind of dividing line where the braid joins, and then the two sides of the sash are mirror images of each other. So that's kind of characteristic of the sprang technique. It's a very ancient technique that we know. We see in the archaeological records, so this goes way back. And then, of course, the use of the corn husk and the fringes are often described as representing rain clouds and falling rain. So any feast day you go to, usually the men are wearing these sashes, and as we're dancing and praying for rain, the sash itself is representative of what we're praying for, which also represents fertility as well, because we all do know that water is life, right? And that's what we know that here in New Mexico. So, next slide, please. So, a little bit of history of the Pueblo Fiber Arts Guild. As was mentioned in my introduction, I co-curated an exhibit in 2010 at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center. We wanted to share with the public and mostly our Pueblo communities a little bit more about the history, this amazing rich history, that textile history that we have in the Southwest. Out of that exhibit, or part of that exhibit, was a series of workshops called the Pueblo Artist Workshop Series. And so I was asked to participate in that and offering classes for interested individuals so that we can just kind of share a little bit more in depth on some of the techniques and how, different yarns are prepared for the weaving process and so on and so forth. So those workshops started in 2010, but they continued because there was so much interest. And so we had a mix. In the beginning, we had a mix of both native and non-native students that were taking the classes, and they were very successful, and they went on for several years after the exhibit came down. It was up for 2 years. It was only scheduled to be up for 1 year, but they decided to keep it for another year because we were getting so much visitation and so much engagement with the public, both Pueblo and non-native folks. So it was a very successful show, and I just want to thank Greg for making that amazing collection available for that use. So after a few rounds of those classes, after a couple years, then I really started feeling the need to create something bigger, that would allow Pueblo folks to learn these techniques, because I started realizing that not all of the Pueblos had a strong weaving tradition. And so I saw that it had, in many of the villages, it had deteriorated to a point where it was maybe just a handful, if that, of weavers left in some of the villages that were still creating the sashes for use within the community. And so I saw that there was a need, and I thought, well, if I can do anything about it, I'm happy to do it. So I was right away started thinking of different ways to kind of fill that gap and create opportunities for Pueblo individuals to learn a little bit more about that history and learn some of the techniques and so on and so forth. And as you know, what happens a lot of times with, as you know, we follow the breadcrumb trail, right? Different opportunities come up along the way, and I was approached by the Flowering Tree Permaculture Institute out of Santa Clara with artist Roxanne Swenso to work with a group of gentlemen from the Tewa Pueblos to revitalize this textile tradition, and it was part of the permaculture work that they had been working on for several years. And for a good couple of years, we were working together and sharing knowledge and history about textiles. And we had several gentlemen who I've remained very close contact with over the years since then. And we're always sharing ideas and helping each other out with different projects and so on and so forth. And so I'm very proud of that work, but I've probably taught had over 200 students over the last 15 or so years from all different Pueblos, all the Pueblos, from Hopi, from Isleta del Sur, from Piro-Manso-Tiwa en Las Cruces, all the way from Taos and all the way down and in between. I've worked with folks from every single Pueblo, and I probably have my work, textiles, dancing in all of the Pueblo plazas that exist. So that is something that I'm very proud of as an artist, because although I'm a little bit involved on the museum end of stuff, for me, what really fulfills my heart and my work is working with our Pueblo people and revitalizing our textile tradition, and also making available the textiles that we need so that our traditions and culture can continue on well into the future, and creating weavers that are taking it upon themselves to continue, and then some of which will go on and continue to teach within their own respective communities. And one of my star students is here today, Chris Velarde, so thank you for coming out, Chris. So as a result of different opportunities that I've had, I was a Native Artist Fellow here at SAR, so I had that amazing opportunity to work and do research, and I had unlimited access to the collection here at the Indian Arts Research Center, and that was a life-changing experience for me. So I've always maintained, aside from my education career, teaching in the public school system in Albuquerque, I always, kind of maintained my work in the textiles and, constantly taking orders for folks who need textiles for use in their villages. So for several years, we were hosted out of the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center, which is where things kind of got started. And it started off with the Pueblo textile exhibit. The classes went on, and then we went on. They created a space for us to create a show, a Pueblo textile show. The first show ever of its kind by Pueblo Fiber artists for Pueblo Fiber artists. So over the years, we've had support from the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center, but over time, there are staff changes and different changes within various organizations, but with the connections that I made here at SAR and with an extended network of supporting individuals, we were able to put our heads together and create a space together with the Poeh Museum, the Poeh Center in Milwaukee, where we are now hosted. So last year was our first year hosting the show at the Poeh Center, and it was our largest show ever. But I could not, none of this could happen without the amazing, generous support of SAR and Elisha and her team. So thank you very much for helping with that work. The Poeh Center has also been an amazing support. Again, my connection with the Poeh, goes back to my work with the Flowering Tree Permaculture Institute out of Kapowinge. And the gentleman that I, had the privilege and honor of working with over those couple of years. But our work has continued since then, even though these particular projects and fellowships kind of finished and are done, but our work is kind of just morphed into other things. And so now we're here today, doing this amazing education and promoting of Pueblo textiles and fiber arts, not only to the native audience, but the greater public audience as well. So I really appreciate everyone coming out. Next slide, please. Oh, before you change. So the image on the left is one of the mantas that I completed a few years ago. It was an order that I did for Hopi. And if you look at the top and the bottom borders, that's natural indigo. So I have been working with natural dyes. And historically, we know that indigo was used mostly out in Hopi, but it was a very valuable trade item that was brought up the Camino Real and was traded out of villages like Pecos Pueblo, Santo Domingo, and others. But those were kind of the main sources, because a lot of the weavers from Hopi would come out all the way from northern Arizona, would come out all the way to the Rio Grande Pueblos on their burro, their donkeys, with their textiles and their stuff to trade for piñons, chili, fruits, and a lot of the turquoise and spondyla shell, spiny oyster shell jewelry. And so I've heard many stories of some of the older weavers, Hopi weavers, that many of which have since passed on in recent years, talking about, they themselves or their father or their, godfather coming out this way to the Rio Grande Pueblos to trade with the Rio Grande villages. So there's an amazingly long history there of trade and commerce between the western Pueblos out at Hopi that were coming out and trading and sending goods back and forth. So most of the textiles that we see in some of the ethnographic photos, like the woman from Isleta, usually the mantas that they're wearing and sometimes the shawls were all traded out from Hopi. So I kind of refer to Hopi as kind of like the Levi Strauss of the Pueblo world, right? Because they were providing such a surplus of textiles that were being used for everyday use as well as ceremonial use and any Rio Grande Village that you go to now, you're going to see textiles being used that were probably very likely traded out. Of course, nowadays we have seen such a decline in some of the more traditional weaving, such as the hand-woven kilts, being replaced with monk's cloth, which was mentioned in the previous talk, Shirley Pino. Monk's cloth, which is a commercial balanced weave that is used today for creating the kilts and the white mantas that we see being used. And a lot of times that is preferred because it's a cheaper, and I use cheaper as a relative term, a cheaper alternative to the hand-woven cloth. So just to give you an idea, a couple of yards of monk's cloth, I think maybe running around $80 nowadays, if not maybe 100. But a hand-woven Hopi manta may set you back about $1,000. So, and that's because of the amazing amount of work. Although the yarns, the cotton yarns used today are commercial yarns, it's still an amazingly absorbent amount of time that goes into warping and weaving these mantas and cloths. It's still being done. It is not a dead art. There are still weavers that survive and make a living from that tradition, because, you know, as the people in our villages, we continue to practice our traditions, and out in Hopi, textiles are still a very vibrant, living part of Hopi culture and tradition, and are needed and required for certain ceremonies, and the wedding ceremonies being one of the main ceremonies that require a large amount of textiles. And so there's a very elaborate exchange of gifts when two individuals decide to join and create a family. And so this gift giving of textiles and food goods and baskets and pottery are all very valuable items that are exchanged between families and clans, between the two clans that are being married, to kind of reinforce those relationships within the community, so that the community will continue to grow. And as a result, then both individuals have their ticket, if you will, to the spirit world upon the completion of our life. So it's all a cycle that goes around. And so just the very way that we even set up a weaving is also in a cycle, usually a figure eight or a circular pattern. So it's all kind of in keeping with this idea of cycles and rites of passage, if you will, from birth to death, from the time when we return to the spirit world. Next slide, please. So another experience that I had, and one of my mentors here, Dr. Lori Webster, and here we are at the Penn Museum looking at this amazing tie-dye blanket, which I believe is from Grand Gulch. Please correct me if I'm wrong, anyone in the audience. But an amazing textile that as soon as I was able to start researching Pueblo textiles, I would see many of these textiles in Kate Peck-Kent's work and others. And I would, always see these pictures in the literature. But I always, in the back of my mind as a weaver, I would always say, well, I wonder what the back looks like, or I wonder what the treatment was of the salvage, or I wonder how that tassel was done. So you can't really engage with the textiles on that level when you're looking at pictures on a page, right? So when right around 2018 or so, I was approached by Dr. Lori Webster to join her team of researchers to document many of the textiles that were excavated from the Bears Ears area. And so as a teacher, I had summers available. I wasn't available to travel to visit museums during the school year, but she would kind of finagle things so that these trips could happen in the summer, so that then I had the time to be able to go and participate in these reconnaissance visits, visiting all these different museums and looking at these textiles. And so the research team consisted of myself, Chuck LaRue, who's a wildlife biologist and bird expert, Aaron Garrity, who's a textile expert, my colleague Chris Lewis from the Pueblo of Zuni, who's a fiber artist and basket extraordinaire, Mary Wiaki from Santa Clara, Comanche, and then myself. So with this dynamic research team, we lent our expertise to the work that was being done to document these textiles and put them together on a database to make them more readily available for source communities, native ancestral communities where these textiles come from, as well as archaeologists and just individuals interested in learning more about these textiles. But no such database existed prior, and many of these textiles were just sitting in shelves, just like you see behind us here. Rows and rows of these storage cabinets, and these textiles are just sitting there without, being, accessed. For myself and my Pueblo colleagues on this research team, it was very moving to be able to interact. And in our Pueblo traditions, we believe that these textiles have their own life. And so we acknowledged that, offered prayers and offerings to engage with these textiles and learn from them. And as a result, all three of us were able, of course, to gain a source of inspiration. I have never seen weaving so fine as work that was being done 1,000, 1,200 years ago. So it was very inspiring to be able to sit and with a dental tool count warps and look at how the edge of the tie-dye work was done, and look at the different techniques of, different ways that people were working with textiles, creating textiles, dyeing textiles, so on and so forth. It was just such an amazing opportunity that I've had the privilege of being involved in. Next slide, please. So this is an example of some of my replication work. It's my understanding that some of you may be familiar with the Ventana Cave poncho, which as it's known in the literature. But this is a replica piece that I did after I had the opportunity from the Arizona State Museum to study the actual textile. And it's my understanding that it was recently repatriated and reburied. So it's no longer available for research or anything else through NAGPRA. So to my knowledge, this is the only replica that exists of that particular textile. So I had some natural brown cotton that I had grown and spun, and for me it was very exciting to be able to work with natural brown cotton, which I obtained on a visit in Oaxaca, Mexico, to get natural brown cotton seeds that I was able to grow out here and have a source of it. So I was spinning and doing my thing with the cotton, but I had these beautiful balls of hand-spun natural brown cotton known as algodón coyuchi, but didn't have a project in mind. And it wasn't until I was able to study this particular textile, which is a hohokam textile, by the way, found in Ventana Cave just outside of Tucson, that I was able to replicate the gauze weave technique. If you see these kind of horizontal open work bars across the bottom, that's known as gauze weave, and that's a warp kind of manipulation technique. But what was really, what I was really impressed with, and something as a result of having been able to actually hold and study the textile in my hands, gloved hands of course, then I was able to take that jump and say, okay, I can figure this out. And so this was my first attempt at figuring out this weft wrap open work technique, which creates this beautiful design here that you see in the middle.
The size.
This size, I should have brought it. It's about maybe 8 inches wide by 18 inches long. This particular, both of these techniques together probably have not been practiced by an indigenous person in the Pueblo Southwest for over 1,000 years. So this is a first. And so my heart really is really full when I'm able to engage with these type of textiles and be able to bring them back in a culturally appropriate way for education use and also to share with our native communities. So again, I talked a little bit about my exploration in natural dyes, different weave structures, including weft wrap open work, which both of these techniques, by the way, today are extinct. They're no longer practiced in the Pueblos today. One exception might be the sprang technique, which is still alive in the Hopi villages, working with the braided sashes. But many of these techniques are gone and haven't been brought back, of course, until I came along. Huh?
And why?
Why? Okay, good question. So there's different reasons, and just like any culture, any living culture, there's no culture that is static unless it ceases to exist. So with the advent and the history of different cultural innovations and then the influx of commercial materials, different techniques, different tools, things just kind of have a tendency to change over time. And so for various reasons, which, we really, have no way of knowing, there were certain techniques, certain patterns, certain ways of doing things that may have been laid to rest for a particular purpose. And that's one of the reasons as an indigenous artist, as a Pueblo individual, we always approach these things with a great deal of respect and ask permission from the spirit and the spirit of the textile itself to be able to, because many of the textiles, I shouldn't say many, some of the textiles are often found in burial contexts. So we have to be ultra sensitive of how we approach, and this idea of indigenous archaeologists and indigenous people in archaeology has been a big thing. But I've been very blessed to be able to work with my Pueblo colleagues, and as we approach this work, we're discussing, these issues and how we should approach them. What, should we, just to be careful not to take liberties that may be overstepping our bounds and so on and so forth. But for purposes and in ways of doing things to acknowledge the ancestors and the spirits of the individuals that were gifted with these textiles, we're always keeping that on the forefront of our work as we engage with this material. So I don't know if that answers your question. Okay. So we see one of the things that just kind of opened my world and my whole concept of this amazing textile tradition as Pueblo people is that we see an amazing continuity. And so one example would be the battens or the tools, the weaving tools that we use to create the weavings, many of which remain unchanged for over 1,000 years. So you're seeing this batten, you're seeing this awl. This awl is made with a certain type of wood. This is greasewood. And this batten is made with a certain type of wood that has a continuity well over 2,000 years. So it's not just a matter of going to Lowe's or going to Home Depot and buying an oak slat and, roughing something out and saying, oh, this is good enough, I'll work with this. So when we approach things in a culturally sensitive way, we're acknowledging our ancestors and the over 1,000 years of history of ways of doing things that our ancestors had a certain purpose and reason for gathering the materials for the tools from a certain area. Why? Because maybe in our history, in our migrations, in our clan migrations, we acknowledge certain places where our people may have traveled from. So in taking it to that next step to actually going and looking for these certain types of woods and materials that we use, there's meaning behind. So, you know, the greasewood, you know, has a purpose and has a meaning. But all of these woods are very hard woods. And so as weavers, when we sit and weave, and if you look at some of the old weaving tools, many times you'll see ridges along the back edge and the bottom of the batten as the weaver is flipping open to hold the shed open and pass the weft through to weave. And the same thing with the various other tools, right? But you're looking at these tools, I can take you to museum collections where we'll look at the exact same tools, virtually unchanged, for 1,000 years plus. And to see that type of continuity is not very common in many art forms anymore that we see. But to be able to have that unbroken line of continuity, so this is like our lifeline and our connection with our ancestors, with our Pueblo ancestors, that goes back so long and has such a long history. But the connection that I wanted to make between, you know, these weaving tools and the implements and even down to the material that's being used for them is having had the opportunity to be able to engage with prehistoric material. We're looking at all kinds of implements, from wooden implements, any perishable material, through the perishables project that I've been involved with. We look at planting sticks, coas, that were used to plant prehistorically. And so it's those same type of hardwoods that you need that hardness to be able to, you know, dig into the sand, you know, and plant your seeds. Because of course in the dry farming techniques that was used prehistorically in the Pueblos, sometimes you need to go down, sometimes as far as a foot to put those seeds in down to the moisture level so that, you know, your plants will have enough moisture to be able to sprout. So it's the weaving itself in and of itself is in keeping with our agricultural tradition. And so when we're putting in our batten to weave, we're essentially making the hole to put in the seed and plant it and weave so that our plants will grow up. And as we're weaving from the bottom up on the upright looms, then we're slowly, just like our plants, right? Just like our corn plants, our chili, our watermelons, whatever, pumpkins. When they're planting, they're so delicate when they're just coming out, right? And that's when we say they are like our little children, and we hold, you know, take care of our little children and hold them and protect them, right? And make sure they have plenty of food and water and everything that they need. It's the same thing when a Pueblo farmer plants his field. So we create, put an altar out there for them, encourage them to be strong, encourage them to endure, you know, be strong, you know, you'll make it, you can do it. And encourage them, sing to them, talk to them, right? And so that's the same thing when I'm sitting at my loom and I'm weaving. A lot of times we're singing our traditional songs and encouraging it, you know, and tell it, you know, wow, you're really coming up nice. Your edges are real nice. Be strong, you can make it. And then all of those prayers, you know, because when we're sitting at the loom, we're breathing our life breath into the warp and weft. And so that textile becomes alive. So when it's off the loom and it goes to whoever it needs to go to, then that individual, when they use it in their ceremony, will have all of that beauty, all of those blessings for themselves as individual, but not only that, their families and the larger community and the whole world, not just us. So all of our prayers, all of our songs, dances, ceremonies is for all life, wherever we find life. So it's blessings for everyone in that continuity. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a picture of some of the dye work. This is my indigo vat, so one of the vats that I was interested in. When I first started learning about dyeing, I took a workshop and I learned how to work with, manipulate chemicals to work with indigo. Indigo is a very non-traditional dye, and it is because it uses a reduction method. It's reduction and oxidation. So you almost, you have to be aware of, it's not just a matter of boiling up your dye, throwing your material in and taking out this beautiful colors. No, there's a whole process, but it's through fermentation. And I know that historically fermented urine was used to dissolve the indigo, remove the oxygen, because it has to be an anaerobic environment in order for the dye to adhere. So when I'm dyeing my wool and I first take it out, let's say I throw in a white skein and I first take it out, it's a beautiful lime green. But as oxygen hits it, it turns blue right before your eyes. It's an amazing experience to work with. So I love working with indigo. So this is one of my belts that I actually brought here, and I have, this is one of my pieces with indigo. But as I was dyeing and learning how to dye with indigo, this particular one, you notice the difference in the hue of blue? This one is with the fermented urine. So it's kind of a different palette. They're still blues, but it's a different palette than the chemically manipulated. It's still natural indigo, but you see the difference in the color. And so it's a lot of these things that, for whatever reason, because this process is so specialized, if one little thing is off on indigo, it will not work for you. And it's probably one of the most frustrating things for natural dyers and any fiber artists. But once you learn the intricacies and how to manipulate and balance those variables, then you can get beautiful blues. And the ancestral Pueblos, some of them, not all of them, because it was a very specialized, and still is today, kind of a very specialized kind of niche of fiber arts. But very fulfilling nonetheless, because the blue color, indigo, by the way, is the only natural blue dye that exists, and it is very, it's a very stable dye. It does not fade. Early our blue jeans were dyed, but today our blue jeans, that kind of faded stonewash look that we like, is characteristic of indigo, because indigo sits on top of the fiber, and so it abrades, and as it abrades, you get this nice stonewashed jean look that we all like today, right? But on wool, and it will dye any natural fiber, on wool we get these beautiful colors, and we see that as the blues, which of course in the Pueblo Southwest with our turquoise, right? These blue-green, blue colors are very important because they're in keeping with the sky, the waters, moisture, turquoise, life, blessings, fertility, all of that is in keeping with that. So it becomes a very important color in the palette of the Pueblo Southwest. Next slide. So teaching and learning, these are my two daughters. You can see they started from a very young age. This one here now is 18. She's going to be graduating this year from Albuquerque High, and my youngest is in 7th grade. But they both started learning from a very young age on the backstrap loom in the style of weaving of my wife, who's a native Nahua of Mexico. And I feel a very strong responsibility to pass up and pass down these traditions, because I've also had opportunities to teach individuals both older, my age, and younger than me. So I really enjoy teaching and sharing the techniques. Like I said, I've taught over 200 students from all the pueblos in the Southwest. And I also think it's very important not only to teach the techniques, but the history that goes behind that, because a lot of times not everyone has had that or had the opportunity to learn that history. So through different Master Artist Workshop series, beginning with the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center, most recently I've also been working with the Herd Museum through their Master Artist Workshop series. I usually teach a class every summer through the Herd Museum. And It's again to promote and revitalize the Pueblo Fiber Arts, growing heritage cotton, contributing to research, and working with youth. So I had the opportunity during the pandemic through a grant from SAR as well as through the Herd Museum to do youth workshops. And so I was able to share a little more with my own daughters, and then a couple of young ladies from the Pueblos of Cochiti and Kiwa, San Domingo. And those were, I always love working with youth because they have kind of a different way of engaging, and it's very, kind of feeds my soul. So next slide, please. So here's my daughter weaving, and this is our most recent class last summer at the Poeh. We had a very mixed group, but it's always, one of the highlights to my summer that I look forward to. And, I'd like to thank Chris for helping coordinate that at the Poeh. But always an amazing experience. They usually make 2 projects, a small chongo hair tie, and then a little bit larger bout with some of the design work. But it's always a very lively, and we get together. The classes are 1 week for 6 hours. Usually most of us stay a few hours after to keep it up, because we know that after that week, then we go back to our lives and things get busy, but it's always a very pleasant experience. So next slide. Some of my work and some of my teachers aren't just limited to the Pueblos. I also have many teachers, one of which, Doña Maria, has passed. She's from the village of Huehuetla in the state of Hidalgo, Mexico. She was the last weaver of this particular garment known as quexquemil. And so in her community, these 2 women are from the same community, Huehuetla. They wear a very characteristic double woven sash, which has concentric diamonds. But I'm drawn and very interested in techniques that are on their way out. In each of these villages, this is also Doña Maria from Santa Ana, Huitlalpan, who she's Otomi. These women are Tepewa, and she's from another Tepewa community. Each of these women are the last weavers in their villages. Like after they're gone, that's it. It's gone. So I really, am very blessed and privileged to be able to have had the opportunity to work with them, to, breathe their knowledge and their hands. And one of the things that I've noticed about indigenous Mexico, just like indigenous communities anywhere, they're always so open and willing to share very openly. And more so as an indigenous person, going and, following the protocols and, offering something back and creating a synergy has been a very valuable experience. And so I'm very happy to be able to have had the opportunity to meet these amazing women and work with them and help them, of course, in any way that I can. I usually take suitcases full of yarn and twine and stuff for them, and they're also very appreciative as always. So one of the highlights of my work. Next slide. Cotton here, again, a beautiful picture of a Mixtec woman from San Juan, Colorado, a Mixtec community in Oaxaca. You see all this beautiful natural colored cotton from white, kind of a light brown, and then like a reddish brown. You see the spindles there, the large calabash gourds that they used to spin the yarn, all hand spun cotton. And then this is some of my Sakatan Aboriginal cotton that I grew in my own garden, which are ancestral seeds that I got from an archaeologist, Glenadine, who, had just a handful of seeds left. She says, "This is what I got, I'm giving them to you." And so I grew them out, and then I gave her, of course, a nice stock for herself to share, and that's how we go. Yes?
Were you able to go to any of the weaving collectives in San Cristobal de los Casas?
Yes, yeah. So we did make it down to Chiapas and interacted a little bit more. They work more with wool, and they're doing, there's amazing techniques that are done there. But each village is like a whole world of, this amazing, ancient traditions that have survived, millennia. And each community, has like the dress here of the woman that you see in the pictures called a posahuanco. And those are, the purple, it traditionally is dyed with a mollusk called pupura panza. And that mollusk is on its way to extinction. But it's very sad that many of these traditions are being lost. But it's so amazing coming from a Pueblo community in the Pueblo Southwest, where the ancient way of preparing the cotton for spinning was the exact same that these women still practice today. So to be able to kind of go to another indigenous community and see how they beat the cotton on a mound, right, that is the exact same way that we know through our oral tradition and our oral histories. To see that, it just makes it more clear in my mind that this technology came up from the South, and it was through our clan migrations from our Pueblo communities that this knowledge was brought into the Southwest. And it's sad to see that some of the aspects of that tradition are extinct now in the Pueblos, but there's at least one here that is making efforts to make those connections and bring some of these things back. Next slide. So these are just some examples of some of my recent work. Any given time, this is a lot that I have, but a lot of my work is, once it's off the loom, it's off to its new owner, because I have such a long list of orders that I'm working on at any given time. But this is a brocaded sash with a traditional design. A little bit of a twist on the traditional colors, but there's a hand-woven kilt here with the natural braid, and then the traditional colors and design. Next slide. And then one of my rain sashes here that after we finish the braiding, there's a white clay, kaolin clay, that we put on there to whiten it, and it also kind of serves as a stain guard, but it has, of course, metaphorical meaning as well, which is in keeping with, again, the rain clouds and the spirits that come and bless the people with rain and blessings so that the people can continue. So with that, I say hoyu. Thank you very much for coming. I think we have time for questions.
Thank you so much, Louie. That was amazing. And thank you so much for sharing with all of us. Mm-hmm. And we do have time for questions. So if you have a question, I'll bring you the microphone. Okay.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation, Louie.
Thank you.
You were the answer to my prayers. When I found you, it gave purpose to my collection of 300 Pueblo textiles, and you fulfilled far beyond my greatest expectations.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yes, here we go.
First of all, Wopilatanka, thank you very much for bringing this here. My good friend here, Tachin, said, Sheila, you have to come hear this guy with me. Got you a ticket. And so I followed his advice, and I did. I wanted to just say something about that connection. There are no borders. They're just chicken scratches in the ground that somebody thought had validity of some sort. And so your showings of the weavings from Mexico touch my heart, because I come from the Puepacha people, sometimes called the Tarasco people, through different translations, but we're the people, the fishermen, and from Michoacan. And our rebosos, our shawls, are blue, deep blue, with very thin white lines, and I'm sure you've probably seen them. And it didn't click to me until now that those were indigo. And so I appreciate you showing that interrelationship that we all have together. We are all indeed related, and that reciprocity still survives somehow, and that you're trying to revive that and restore that is so insignificant. But I wanted to ask you about the indigo, because indigo, when the European invaders came, they forced indigenous peoples to work to harvest the indigo, which is toxic, very poisonous. And a lot of people died that were forced to do that. What is the process to avoid the toxicity of the indigo in your processes?
So the toxicity of indigo, as many folks use it today, it can be very toxic because they use lots of synthetic chemicals to manipulate the different variables that are required for dyeing. The traditional process of indigo processing is 100% natural and is not toxic, non-toxic. So the traditional process is a fermentation process where they cut the indigo plant. And it's just, I mean, if you were to look at it, it just looks like a regular bush, like a green bush. But they cut it, it grows about yay high, and they cut it down and they lay it in these pools, these cement pools, and weight it down with logs and bricks or stones, and they fill it with water. This can only happen in areas where it's semi-tropical, where it maintains a certain temperature, because for fermentation you need a certain warmth, a certain temperature for the bacteria and the fermentation process to happen. And so once that, it's a series of pools that one drains into the other. So after the first pool ferments, then they pull the plug on that, and that drains into the next pool. And then it's a process of agitation, agitating the solution to activate the indican. And then that's allowed to settle down to the bottom. And then they drain off the top layer of water from there, and you're left with this blue sludge. And that sludge is what's dried on these tejas, or the clay tiles, roof tiles. They lay this sludge in there and sun dry it, sun bake it, until it turns into like little crumbly rocks, if you will. And that material is what is traded, what allows indigo to be traded long distances. But the natural process is non-toxic. I mean, I could taste indigo, it's not gonna hurt me because it's all natural fermentation. And if you're familiar with kombucha, I know a lot of people drink kombucha nowadays, but it's that fermentation, which is actually good for you, right? But here in the Southwest, because indigo is not water soluble, you cannot dissolve indigo in just plain water. You have to have an alkaline solution, a basic solution to dissolve the indigo, and it just turns out that our urine is just the right pH to be able to dissolve indigo. So indigo is, I could give a whole semester-long class on indigo. Indigo has been used by various cultures throughout the world. Japan, Africa, India, and here in the Pueblo Southwest. But most people don't know that indigo was a very important dye stuff here in the Pueblo Southwest. But it has impacted many ancient cultures, but very few of those cultures still have a surviving indigo tradition today. But the cultures that do have it value it very much, and it has an amazing value and is often surrounded with a great deal of respect for as a dye stuff, but also, you know, being able to produce such a rich array of blue hues. But it is very, very important, and definitely impacted many indigenous cultures in Mesoamerica, and then came up into the Pueblo Southwest, and now there's a handful of us that are still making efforts to use it and revitalize it. But I get questions all the time on my mantas about why the blue, where does the blue come from? And I was like, let me tell you about the blue. Because most people have no clue, because it was something that was lost so long ago, because the knowledge was so specialized. But the indigo blue borders on those mantas were like the Sunday's best of the grandmas, the Pueblo grandmas. That was where if they had an indigo border manta, they were like styling. Yeah. So,
Any other questions?
a couple up here.
So on that manta, was the center part also really dark indigo, or was that another?
On the brown manta at the beginning of the...
Yeah, was that brown?
This one?
Oh, was that?
This one?
That's the same one that was up on the screen? Oh,
Yeah,
it's brown.
it's like one of the first
It didn't
slides.
look, on the screen, it looked like it was like a dark blue. Like, it was hard to
Oh,
tell
no.
that it was
Yeah,
brown.
that is black. That's a black,
Oh, it is black.
but the
okay.
indigo border. So there's two styles. So it's a really interesting, because I was at a show in one of the pueblos, and I had this manta on the table. And this lady came up and she says, "What's this?" And I said, "It's a manta." And I guess she had never seen a brown manta with blue borders. And she just kind of smirked and then walked off, right? But most of what are familiar with, and a lot of times I get orders from different, some women from different pueblos, and some of them want all black. But it's because they don't really know that the indigo was like a thing. And so that has, over time, has been lost, because a lot of the people now don't even realize that what indigo was, what it meant, what the value of it was. And I credit Greg Shaw for allowing me to study his collection, and he has a couple of really amazing mantas that just inspired me. And since then, this was the first manta that I made for my daughter when she was just a little thing. And so now she's outgrown it, and my youngest has outgrown it, so now I need to get busy and make them their new mantas. So I'm hoping to be able to weave her manta for her graduation this year in May.
What other natural dyes do you use?
I work with cochineal, and so this sash right here is done in cochineal. And so another characteristic of the traditional or the Hopi style of sash is that you have the design on both sides in complementary colors. It's called complementary floated warp. And so this is two different shades of cochineal, which is the insect, cactus insect, and the scarlet red is mordanted with tin, and the more vermilion red is mordanted with alum. So depending on what mordant is used, it's going to affect the color. And then the black, or the navy here is indigo, a really strong dark indigo. So indigo gives you a whole range from like dark navy blue, almost black, to these beautiful, light blues. And it's all a matter of how many times it's dipped, so how many layers of blue have built up to build that color. It's amazing. I love working with natural dyes.
And we are actually at time. So just before we go, though, Louie, can you tell us a little bit about the upcoming show in case anybody
Yes.
wants to come?
So please join us May 11th, Saturday, May 11th at the Poeh Center, right along the highway from 10 to 4. We will be having over 40 Pueblo Fiber artists, as well as our first Pueblo fashion show. So our last speaker for the series, Shirley Pino, is helping us organize that part of it, but we're having 4 amazing fashion designers, Pueblo fashion designers, share their designs with us on that day. So please come join us. We'll have a food truck and Pueblo dances and demonstrations throughout the day. So come out. It'll be a good time, and we're looking forward to it.
What time do you think the fashion show will be?
At 1. It starts at 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, one of our headliners from that fashion show is our next speaker, which will be on April 24th. So come back for that. So thank you again, Louie. Thank you so much
Howard,
for
thank
coming.
you.
Everybody, please thank Louie.